Hi, my name is Jared Davis, and in this tutorial video I'm going to demonstrate how you can optimize and correct a photograph you may have taken of a framed object. Sometimes when you want to use an image of a framed item that you've created, it's nice to clean up the image and make it look more professional and more presentable. When you're taking a photograph of a framed item, it's best to try and ensure you've got good lighting and try to eliminate as much reflection as you can in any of the glass or glazing you use in the frame item. Sometimes that might mean taking it on a slight angle. The best scenario, ideally, would be to remove the glass from the frame and take a photo of it without the glass before you complete the whole frame. Well, let's start with an example here. I'm going to open a file that I've got. So this is an example of a framed image that's been kindly sent to me from Fast Frame in Bentleigh in Melbourne. And as you can see with this image here, it's a snapshot taken of a frame. Now they've taken the glass out before they took the photo. But even then, there's still a little bit of imperfection in this before we can really use it for a professional level of marketing. As you can see, there's a little bit of a barrel roll. It's not quite straight, and it's possibly a little bit dark, maybe from not having enough lighting. So let's correct all these elements and see if we can get this photo looking presentable and professional for use, whether we use it in our marketing, advertising, or our website. So the first thing to do, we need to convert the background to a layer. So we go right click on this background and you get the option here in the menu to select layer from background, and we click OK. What that does is allow us to manipulate and change this as a layer in Photoshop. The next thing we might want to do is to look at straightening this up. As you can see, it's a little bit not quite straight on the horizon. So there's a quick feature for doing this in Photoshop. If you go underneath these tools here on the eyedropper tool, if you right click on that option, you'll see another menu comes up, and one of those options is called the ruler tool. If we left click on the ruler tool, what we can do is now choose a line, say along here. So if I click and hold down and then click here, that will create a line on the artwork, and then that line I want to be straight along the horizon. So if I click now the straighten button, that will now rotate the image as required to be straight on the horizon along that line. So there's a handy tool called the ruler tool. Having a look further at this image, I just expanded out a bit. You can also see that we may need to do some work with the color intensity or the contrast, because the darks are quite dark. So there's another feature in Photoshop called levels. So if you go image adjustments and then levels, levels is an area that's worth having a play with and having a bit of fun, because it's amazing the difference you can change in an image by changing some of the slider bars here. Without being a color management technical expert, simply by playing, you can actually find you can achieve a better result to compensate for any lack of lighting. You can even get different hues or tones of color and adjust them accordingly as well. So then now you can adjust that until you're satisfied with the result. And now we can move on to the next step, which will be correcting the barrel roll. Now, there's a number of different tools in Photoshop that allow you to correct things like this. For example, one tool you could use is transform and then warp. But what we might use in this case is a filter. There's a filter called the lens correction filter. And if we select lens correction, what we can do here is this sometimes identifies the type of Canon you may have used, type of camera you may have used. In this case, it's a Canon. But what we can do is use this and just click and drag and adjust for any barrel roll to try and straighten things up. And that was just a click and drag as I did on the screen there. And then if we go OK, that will now correct it to help straighten up the outside edges. So that's a quick way to correct barrel roll from different lenses. Now let's have a look at cropping this down. If we use our crop tool here, or polygon lasso tool it's called, what I could do now is select the outside dimensions of the frame, like so, and then join that up. And then what I can do is select that as a separate layer. We can go layer here, and you can go layer via cut. And you can see now we now have two separate layers, the background and the foreground, which is the framed image. We can actually discard this background layer now, so we can go right click delete layer. And now that just leaves us with the framed image. Now we still have a bit of work here because we need to possibly rotate it and position it correctly. So with that layer now we can go edit, transform, rotate, and here we can play around. We may even find, depending on the perspective that you may have taken the photo of, and sometimes it's not uncommon to have an element of perspective in the photo, especially if you're trying to eliminate reflection if there's glass. So we may find use in using the tool called Distort. And Distort will allow us to stretch and manipulate and effectively straighten the image. And you've got the grid lines in the background here. So as you click and drag, you can help use those little gridded lines to create a line of sight or alignment to straighten things up. And then when you're finished, hit enter, and that'll lock in those changes. We may also, in this case, choose to enlarge the background here, so I can put a nice background image. I will cancel that. Let's go back to clearing those predefined settings. This will allow me now to dynamically adjust the background using the cropping tool. Another way to set the background would be go to image and canvas size, and you could type in a value for the background as well. And so now if I go back to my select tool, I can now click and drag that and center it. So as I mentioned, I would like to put a nice sort of accented background to make this look good. So I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to put this layer behind the image. And in this layer, I want to create a gradient. So behind the paint bucket tool, if we go right click, we have a gradient tool. With the gradient tool, what you can do is you can choose from predefined gradients, or we can modify or create one as well. So for example, we might choose this gradient here to modify. And when you double click, it brings up the properties. And here, what I can do is change the colors. So if I click on this point here, I might choose something like this off-white. And this color here, I might want to choose, say, this dark black. That's an element from the image. And maybe the same here. So now with this gradient that we've got, the way a gradient works, given that I'm on the background layer here, I can click and drag and create a nice background shape there. So that looks good. And now I can also make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. I could go back to this layer and you can double click on it and it'll bring up the layer style properties. And one of those properties is called drop shadow. With drop shadow, what you can do is you can choose the angle of where the light will be shining from, and by adjusting these slider bars here, you can add a shadow effect for a drop shadow on that, if you want to make it look like it's standing out a little bit more three-dimensional. So there you have it. There's a way that you can make a more optimize an image of a photograph of a frame and make it look more professional. And potentially then be able to use that for, say, your website or for some marketing or advertising. And hopefully it's not too challenging for you to have a go and to correct some of your own images.